Welcome to the Squared Circle Pit with your host, Rob Pasbani.
Now entering the Squared Circle Pit. You might be wearing one of his designs on your chests as we speak. We have Juan from Of the Dead Designs. Welcome to the Squared Circle Pit, Juan.
Hello, everybody.
Juan, I wanted to have you on because I know obviously you are a big wrestling fan, and I know you're a big metalhead, and I love the work that you contribute to the wrestling scene.
Thank
And
you.
so just wanted to talk about that a little bit. So my first question to you is, did you get into wrestling first or heavy metal first?
Wrestling first. I got in, like most people my age, I was an Attitude Era kid. My first memory of it is my parents were super against wrestling. So I remember my brother watching it and me going in the room like, oh, you're watching that? We're not supposed to. And then just kind of after that, we just kind of got sucked in, and it was kind of all downhill from there.
Do you remember what was on? Like, what were the angles? The earliest angle that you could remember seeing?
Earliest angle is mostly like the McMahon Stone Cold stuff. You know,
Okay.
yeah. The only thing
So-
the only thing that sucked was like we had to go to bed pretty early, so like we would only be able to watch like the first half hour of Raw. But then there was always like promos, so we're like, okay, I guess we'll see it tomorrow. We'll push record on the VCHS and just we'll see what's going on tomorrow. But it seems intriguing, you know. But
So you got in right at the sweet spot, right when it was
right.
really, really fun.
yeah, right at the peak.
That's awesome. And so did you watch WCW as well, or were you just a WWF guy at the time?
I was just the WF guy. I remember tuning into WCW a couple times and seeing Goldberg like, wait, that's not Austin. Like, who's this guy? And like switch. Oh, I'm on the wrong channel and switching it back. But for the most part, I was always WWE.
Got it. And you grew up on the West Coast, right?
Yes. Yeah, I'm from California.
So did you have any opportunity to see like lucha stuff, or was that go? Because it feels like it's everywhere over there.
Yeah. There's a really popular promotion in San Francisco called Pro Wrestling Revolution, and they do like majority of luchador stuff. I've actually worked with them a few times with a few luchadors and wrestlers. So, but they're always really fun to go to.
Sweet. So who were your guys growing up? Who were the ones that you always rooted for as a kid?
My guys were always like The Undertaker, Mankind, Kane. Like basically, like if you're dark and spooky, you know, you were my guy.
I see. So you keep with the metal aesthetic even in the pro wrestling realm.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
And like, what was your first exposure to heavy music? Like, do you remember the first bands you got into or how you got into it?
It was mostly just, again, like people my age, it was mostly like the Tony Hawk games, like figuring out like punk rock and stuff like that. Because my parents don't really listen to rock music. They're, you know, they're both, I'm the first generation Hispanic. So like they listen to, you know, Spanish music and stuff like that. So I never really was introduced to that till I was already in school. I was a little older and started kind of getting into punk rock. You know, that's kind of where it all started. And then, you know, through junior high and high school, started listening to a little more heavier stuff, a little more screaming. And then one day, my brother's best friend brought us the unhallowed Black Dahlia Murder album. And that was the first time I ever heard anything as like heavy as that, with like the vocals, the music and everything. And like that just completely changed everything for me. Like once I got that album, like I just had to find more.
That's awesome. So the Black Dahlia Murder was like your gateway band into the heavier realm.
Yeah, definitely.
That's really cool. And then so like what other bands, what other sounds were you drawn to at the time? I mentioned the Tony Hawk game. Love the Tony Hawk games. For me as well, big influence. Got into a ton of bands through that. What bands from that were you like, okay, I need to check out more of them?
Those guys like the Suicide Machines, Suicidal Tendencies. I have the song stuck in my head, but I always like I go back and listen to the soundtrack, but the names always kind of escape me. Like I have all the songs like in my playlist, but like the names just always kind of escape. You know, I know like, they're that band for that song, but like the names just never really pop back in.
So you mentioned the Black Dahlia Murder. What other bands were like some of the first gateway bands that you got into?
Carnifex, Job for a Cowboy. I really liked It Dies Today, Every Time I Die, you know, bands like that, bands with a kind of a little more grungier of a kind of sound, you know, just for somebody that always really kind of like piqued my interest the most.
Yeah, I mean, I'm right there with you. I love all those bands.
Yeah.
And of course, like I mentioned, you are a graphic designer. You do
Yes.
merch and other stuff. So when did you start noticing that you have an eye for graphics? Like for me personally, I like wrestling was kind of how I got into graphic design in the sense of like looking at the pay-per-view logos and the wrestler logos and then just doodling them myself, and then the next level of that would be for me was coming up with my own pay-per-view names and drawing the
Yeah.
logos. Was your journey similar, or how did you kind of get into it?
Um, started getting into art when I was a kid, through anime. Like once,
Oh,
like
okay.
I grew up when it just started hitting the scene. I grew up on Dragon Ball Z, like, and that's always been like my biggest influence. Just like being able to draw muscular men. Like if you look at my drawings now and look at like how Dragon Ball Z characters are drawn, you can see the exact like their physique is exact drawn the exact same way because it's just how I kind of figured out, okay, that's how a bicep looks, and that's how like it would look bent like that. Okay, that kind of works out. So that kind of started out my influence, and then it just kind of built from there. I was in bands all in high school, and it was always hard finding someone who could make our flyers, make our merch, things like this. I was like, oh, I can do that. So one day my brother brought home a cracked Photoshop disc for me to try out, and yeah, I was kind of off to the races, just building flyers, building MySpace layouts, and just kind of having fun doing that for a while.
It was just a challenge you thought you could conquer just because nobody else in the band could really handle it, right?
Yeah,
Essentially.
yeah. I was the vocalist, so like that's all I had to do. I didn't have to, move stuff around, get equipment. So I was like, okay, let me make myself useful in other ways too. Not just screaming the mic. Have them not
So,
leer at me.
what was the vibe of the band? What was the sound like?
We were a hodgepodge because again, I was the punk kid. I had friends who were into bands like Dream Theater and Metallica, more style like that. I had friends who were just into pure like death metal. And so we had like death metal sound, but the songs were also like 7 minutes long. So like our sets were only ever like 2 or 3 songs tops. So we got it all done, but for some reason we just decided, you know what, 3 minute song, it's too short for us. We'll add it all in. Put
Right.
everything in there.
Especially for the Dream Theater fan,
Oh,
they need time for their solos.
exactly. Oh, and there were plenty, and we had to find, I'll go stand, over here for the next 2 minutes while they, get their stuff in. So that's fine. That's cool. Oh, keyboardist has a part too. All right, get it all in there. Let's do it.
So you started doing it for your band, and then when did you kind of realize that you had more of a passion for it beyond just it being a hobby? Like you mentioned with the Dragon Ball Z drawings, and then that morphed into doing merch for your band. When were you like, oh, I think I could seriously pursue this further?
I was about 16, and I was doing the band stuff. I was doing, just stuff for us, and then all of a sudden people just started hitting me up. Hey, we need a logo real quick. Can you kind of whip something up for us? Or hey, we like how your guys' band's MySpace layout is, because that's when I was tinkering like HTML codes and kind of like had a more presentable page to kind of help draw people in. And it just kind of snowballed from there. I started off just kind of doing free stuff, just kind of, building a clientele, kind of, positive feedback. And then once all the band stuff kind of, fizzled out, I wasn't really feeling it too much anymore. And I started realizing, oh, I can just do art. This is way easier. I don't have to, contract with 7 different people to kind of get an idea going. I can just kind of, venture off on my own. And, I started doing that for, 4 or 5 years just into music, just, working with bands, making out logos, merch, tour flyers, all that kind of stuff. And dabbled in, promoting shows myself, and then kind of got out of that real quick. But, being able to kind of make sure everything was just, I could create all the art for it.
Yeah, figuring out what your lane is basically in the scene. It sounds like.
Yeah, exactly.
So did you? I really like that the trajectory. It's a very DIY approach of just other people are like, oh hey, you know how to do it. Hey, do it for us. We'll throw you some cash, and then
Yeah.
You build it up bigger and bigger. Then like, what are some of the more notable bands that you've worked with since?
Most of the bands I worked for were pretty small, just kind of small touring bands. About the biggest bands I ever worked for is there's a band called Neurotic November. They were at the Victory Records for a while. Worked with them on their studio album and some tour merch, tour flyers. And then honestly, that was mostly it. Like I liked working mostly with like underground bands. Like I even to now, like I like working with people just starting. Like I want to get their foot in the door, get them running, as soon as they start, they don't have to start off with, just a font logo or just, clip art merch. I want them to make sure that they can come in with, strong stuff and we can just kind of all work our way up.
That's cool. And then who was like the first wrestler to reach out to you? How did you transition to working with wrestlers?
It all kind of worked out pretty well because the music stuff was kind of starting to wind down. My style wasn't as needed, I guess, in like the music realm. And I kind of started noticing, oh, okay, well, work's kind of dipping down. So, and I had joined a art forum, just kind of bouncing ideas off of one another and stuff like that. And an artist by the name of Chris Huffman would run a company called Spot Monkey Media out in Minnesota. And him and a wrestler by the name of Eric Cannon were kind of working on a promotion. They're called First Wrestling. And they hit me up one day like, hey, you do art. Do you want to work on a flyer for us? I'm like, yeah, of course. That sounds fun, wrestling. I love wrestling. So like I could definitely do that. And they wanted a flyer design just like the Hulk Hogan Saturday morning cartoon, like his Rock and Wrestling show. It's like, oh, that sounds fun. I remember drawing that. So I just kind of sat down, started working on that. And then it just kind of snowballed from there. I started working with Eric Cannon, started working with like Chuck Taylor, all the guys that kind of came from that area. So like I didn't even start in California. I started in Minnesota.
Oh wow, that's crazy!
Yeah,
just because that's where the wrestling scene was that you kind of knew people.
Yeah, that I knew.
Essentially.
Yeah,
and much like with the music scene, you just kind of worked your way up, right? Where now you have quite a large roster of notable wrestlers, essentially.
Yeah, it just kind of snowballed because I was slowly getting away from like WWE stuff, starting looking at indie promotions, indie wrestlers. And then when Cody left WWE and went into the indie scene, I had seen him at a show in San Francisco and it got me really hyped up. So as soon as I got home, like 1, 2 in the morning, I just got straight on my computer and I drew a Cody design and I posted it up on social media and he loved it and he picked it up. And then it became kind of like a limited ROH run during his title run. And so I was like, okay, this is kind of cool. Like the wrestlers actually look at the art. So then just kind of dabbling on everybody, on the side when I was working with Chris with, local wrestlers on his scene. And I decided, I'm going to draw the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega. I was like, I had an idea. They were big fans of like Street Fighter. So I'm like, okay, I can draw my Street Fighter characters. And I drew it up overnight. I posted it. And immediately the owner of Pro Wrestling Tees hit me up like, hey, we love your work. Would you like to do some work for us? And I was like, oh, okay, yeah. And then by that week, I already had a Hogan design, a Road Warriors design, a CM Punk design, and it just like completely snowballed. Like I was not expecting it to go as fast as it did.
That's great. And I feel like really a big aid for you was just social media and just the crazy moment in time the wrestling scene was at in that moment. Because, go ahead.
No, yeah, because at that point, there wasn't that many artists in wrestling. Like you could look at the artwork on the websites and the people's stores, and it really was a lot of clip art, a lot of people just kind of hand drawing stuff. No one was really having the style that was popular in music into the wrestling designs just yet. Everyone had a pretty cool logo, pretty simple designs, but for the most part, if you weren't a part of a major promotion, there wasn't a whole lot of outlets to get like these kind of designs out to you. So it kind of really worked out that way.
Yeah, and like you said, that there was a huge demand for artwork and just not enough supply at the moment, and the wrestling industry was kind of expanding at a very quick pace in that moment because it wasn't just WWE and it was like Pro Wrestling Tees and eventually AEW, and they needed, I'm sure they worked with Pro Wrestling Tees, but still there was just like so many more pieces of merch being created that it created all these new jobs for artists such as yourself.
And it was, people who were my age, listened to the same music I did, had the same upbringing as I did. So we were able to kind of mesh a little easier together. I can make the artwork that they grew up on. I love Dan Munford art. You can really see a lot of his influence in my pieces, and people really wanted stuff like that. So I'm like, we can make this work.
Yeah, so that was actually another question of mine is like, who are some graphic designers that you really enjoy their work other than Dan that you mentioned?
Oh, well, mostly it's Dan Mumford. Like, especially when I got into the Black Dahlia murder, like he is one of their main merch designers. I
Mhm.
own, I still have a lot of the shirts I had in high school of his just kind of stored away just because they're just some of my favorite designs. Like just the way he does his line work, the colors he uses was great. Two other guys that I still look at like as some of my biggest influences, God Machine and Grin Design. They're two guys who have amazing line detail, and I love drawing skulls, and a lot of my influences came from them, like just the way they drew it, the just them exaggerating the teeth, the ridges of the eyes, just every tiny little detail that they put into it just made me want to just get better and just kind of work on my style, have their influences, but make sure like I could, stand on my own, to do it.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I'm sure also, as you were saying that, it made me think like album art's probably a big influence for you as
Oh
well.
yeah.
Just being exposed to it, even if not directly, just subconsciously, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Just kind of looking at stuff like, again, Dan Mumford stuff. Gallows, Orchestra of Wolves, Homesick by a Day to Remember, just the line art, him being able to just use a heavy amount of black and still have so much extra detail in it, like that you can keep looking at the artwork and still find something brand new in it, you know, especially at that time, there's so much great artwork. I love um Silverstein's album covers, Atreyu stuff, things like that. I love artwork like that.
That's cool. And so like let's talk about modern wrestling now. So what is your current wrestling diet? Like what do you
Right,
watch regularly now?
right now, it's mostly AEW. Getting back more into Impact and TNA wrestling because I really like the relaunch of TNA. But right now, it's mostly AEW stuff and local promotions in my area. Yeah.
Like which promotions
Uh,
are you
right now,
following in the area?
I right now I watch mostly Supreme Pro Wrestling, West Coast Pro, Oasis Pro Wrestling's really up and coming, UGWA, Hood Slam, things like that.
I've always wanted to go to Hood Slam. Hood Slam seems like such a fun. Like I would fly out to the Bay Area just to see
Yeah,
that
I
because it
always
seems
watch
like
video.
a totally different vibe.
Yeah, I always watch videos of it. I've been dying to go. It's just they're usually on Sundays. I work a factory job, Monday through Friday, so it just never really connects for me.
But it's cool how big of a scene there is in the Bay Area. Like I'm in New
Oh
York,
yeah,
and I'm very lucky. There's a ton of wrestling that comes through, and also the big guys come around all the time as well. But I feel on the West Coast, it's much easier to get in on the ground level, as you were mentioning earlier, and
oh
really
yeah.
see a new talent's like career blossom, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like I got to see Jungle Boy, wrestle in auditoriums pretty low. I remember going two towns over to, pretty a farmer town, and I got to see Brian Cage wrestle. I got to see Timothy Thatcher, Jeff Cobb. I got to see all these wrestlers, just kind of, starting off around here, being like, okay, these guys are really good. They have, something to them. And then, kind of going off and watching all the wrestling and then coming back and saying like, oh man, like that's Brian Cage I just saw on Lucha Underground. You know, I just, seeing Thatcher, work Japan, get into WWE, Cobb do Ring of Honor, Japan, all that stuff. And just like, oh, these guys really, really, really did have something, to really help them, go to the next level.
Absolutely, yeah, and I love that as well. That's what I really loved about the wrestling scene of like 5 years ago was seeing all these guys. It's like these are like these are future TV stars for sure.
Yeah,
Like you
100%.
could easily tell, and then they all became TV stars, and
Yeah,
now
exactly.
and now there's like a I feel like there's now even two generations that came up since them. There's all the people that
Yeah,
replaced them at the top of the cards because they left,
yeah,
and now the people coming up behind them.
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
So who do you
it's been
think who
fun.
do you think are the next wrestlers to break it big that are gonna get through to like AEW or maybe WWE?
The ones I see, especially for my area, is there's one guy by the name of Alpha Zoe. He wrestles primarily in Sacramento and the Bay Area. Like you've been able to see him at at West Coast Pro. He's just doing a tour of Noah right now, so that's been really cool to see. Another guy is by the name of Marcus Luis. He's called the Flying Lion. He's wrestled a few Impact shows when they used to do like their one night only pay-per-views, and just being able to see him throughout the years. I used to see him and Powerhouse Hobbs tag team in APW, All Pro Wrestling, for a while, and just being able to see him kind of grow into his style has been really fun. And then another new wrestler, he's been wrestling, I want to say 2-3 years, is Midas Creed. He's the Golden Eye. He's worked West Coast Pro 2. I believe he's done some GCW stuff. But he's another like phenomenal young wrestler. You can really see, like, once he's in the ring, you can just see the confidence he has, and how he works, how he emotes, all of it.
That's cool. I'm actually not familiar with either of those wrestlers, so and I love that I'm not. I'm on the East Coast, so I'm not as exposed to them. So I definitely want to check them out. I love finding these new guys, much like yourself, and just like, oh, this guy's great. Like, you need to check it. Much like finding a new band and telling your friends about them.
Yeah, and I've been lucky enough to work with all of them to kind of like get their presentation up, work on merch, gear, just kind of helping them, really, sell themselves a lot easier. Like, okay, they are ready. They have all their presentation stuff ready. They're good to go.
That's cool. And so I noticed you mentioned do you watch AW week to week, or?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So what are you thinking about Samoa Joe as the current champion? Do you think it was a good idea to take the title off MJF?
I think so. I think the storyline kind of went in a good direction. I think MJF kind of did everything he could as a champion, and his upcoming feud, if he's still with the company, with Adam Cole, I think it works perfectly without a title belt. It just becomes a blood feud for the sake of a blood feud. I think Samoa Joe is kind of the perfect guy to get these other talents, up to his level. The idea of him and Swerve going at it just sounds awesome. It's interesting to see, like, if Swerve kind of turns face to face Joe, or if they're both so dead set on their goal that they don't really have to, be heel and face. They can kind of be just, let's just see who's better. I want it, I have it. Can you take it from me? I think that storyline kind of works just as well.
Yeah, I feel like Joe always delivers ultimately.
Oh yeah.
So there's no worrying about him. He's going to come through.
Exactly. He'll do the job.
Yeah, I'm very curious for this. I feel like AEW has kind of done a bit of a reset lately, and so it'll be interesting. I feel like they're setting up Swerve, and I think they should set him up. Like, he should be the next world champion. I think he should be the next.
Oh yeah, he's been great.
And I think MJF is definitely signed. There's no way they would have given the world title if he didn't sign it. I just can't imagine it from a business standpoint.
And that's the one thing I do love about AEW is that they still can get me like that. Like, we all are in on it, and they still have the way to be like, but is it real? Like, is it actually real? Like, did he actually, I still get intrigued by that. And that's what makes me, really invested in the product. I still like being like tricked,
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. That's always the best when you get fooled, when you get your disbelief suspended.
Yeah, exactly.
And I noticed you mentioned you don't watch, or you didn't mention WWE, so I'm guessing they don't quite provide for you what you're looking for in pro wrestling.
Not so much. Like, there's a couple wrestlers that I really do enjoy. I saw them on the indies. I worked with them on the indies, but after years of their product was, I kind of just got out of it. I went from watching television weekly to, I'll catch, the condensed version on, streaming services, to, I'll watch all the pay-per-views. Like, I can catch up later to, like, I'll watch the big four, and if the B show's on and if I'm home, I'll catch it. But, I was just kind of just being disappointed with the week to week, the drop pushes, and just kind of, it's a B show. So, like, nothing really is going to get, pushed forward unless it's close to one of the big four pay-per-views, so it was just, I don't have to watch it. I don't have to hate watch it. I don't have to, like, sit here and feel like, oh man, they're not really doing what I want. So I'm like, okay, well, there's other stuff now. We have so much extra wrestling. Like, I don't have to be so dedicated. If I can jump in, check it out, and if I'm still not feeling it, that's fine. I can still support the wrestlers I like, and I don't have to invest fully into what WWE is selling.
Yeah, and I totally hear what you're saying completely, and it's so true that we're very fortunate now that there is so much wrestling that, whereas 10 years ago, that's all you had.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, if I'm not watching this, I'm not watching really any wrestling unless you're buying DVDs or whatever. Streaming wasn't as crazy as it is now. So now I find I don't even have time to watch all the wrestling that I want to watch, let alone the wrestling I don't want to watch.
Yeah. Yeah. I usually spend my weekends just kind of like checking back on what was. I work so much in wrestling that it does kind of hurt, like me being able to actually enjoy and watch wrestling, or it's one thing I do like about AEW is the commentary actually talks about the matches. So if I have to, have my head down sketching for a little while, I at least know what's going on in the match. I can kind of rewind, like, oh, okay, they sounded really excited about that. Let me see the spot. Oh, yeah, they really sold it the way it should have, instead of just on WWE, the commentary, they can be having a completely separate conversation from the match. And, I don't know what's going on. They're not selling me on these wrestlers because they're all off on their own little tangent.
And do you find yourself seeing like other people's merch that you didn't design and being like extra critical of it, or not being able to just watch it's like, oh, that's the design they went with, something like that?
Yeah, I'll check on like new WWE designs, and I know they really like text-based layouts. And the last one I was like, how was that a shirt? Like, I got to figure out how to sell like they sell. Was the Randy Orton Daddy's Back, like not the stylized one, but it literally just said Daddy's Back and like Times New Roman, on the back of it. I'm like, why? Like, there's so much you can do with Randy Orton, like just get a little snake and like intertwining into the letters, do something. But when it's just text or it's just like their face, I'm like, that doesn't work. Like Humberto Carrillo, like he had a Dale Gas shirt, but if you don't read it in Spanish, it literally just says Dale Gas. Like, who's Dale Gas? His name's not Dale Gas. Like, it doesn't work, and
yeah,
I think a lot of the times they just have stuff like that. Like, it's a saying out of context of wrestling. It doesn't mean anything, Kevin Owens' last few shirts, he had like the, I have a dumb people problem. Like, it's shirts I can buy from Spencer's, and I can get it half the price of a WWE shirt. All I have to do is draw a KO on it and boom, I got it.
I think that's the intention. I'm sure like the designers there want to do the stuff that you want, but like their bosses are like, no, Times New Roman. That's it.
Yeah. And
no snake.
I had experience in that. I had worked with the wrestler in WWE, and we had a whole design layout set up and it worked. I got it approved by him. We sent it off, and I got a message a couple weeks back, hey, it didn't pass with them. We got to change it all up. And it did completely, change out the layout of the design. And I kind of got to see like the inner workings, like, okay, they have a lot more check marks they got to hit before this kind of goes out. That was really eye opening.
Oh, that's really interesting. And I'm sure with AEW, it's just like bing, bang, boom, right? Like no real.
For the most part, yeah. I've had a couple times like, hey, they're not a big fan of this. Can we kind of tweak to that? Like, oh, no problem. And they kind of gave me a little bit of breathing time. But when there's the WWE piece, it's like, oh, hey, we need a complete redesign and we need it by tonight. I'm like, okay, that's cool. So like they don't know what they want, but they know they want it, and they also need it right now. So, it kind of works like that. On top of, being a freelance designer, I've worked in print shops for like the last 12 years. So I kind of, I know how to be able to get stuff out in a quick manner too. So that really helps.
Yeah. And I noticed, I think it was 2 weeks ago when the Undisputed Kingdom first came out, you pointed out that the font that they used was literally the SpiderMan font.
Yeah.
And I was blown away by that like, to your point, that would have never happened in WWE. Like that wouldn't have passed in WWE.
Because I'd seen them come out and I saw it, and like my eyebrow raised. I'm like, wait a second. And then the segment was over, so I was like, okay, maybe it was just me. So then I got on Twitter. I was just kind of looking, scrolling, and I saw the artwork again on their T-shirt, and I'm like, no way. So I went on a font website. I typed it in like that's the SpiderMan font, like that 100%. Like not only is it a super popular font, but it's also like, did they get the royalties from it? Was it just someone who just kind of like, quickly just kind of put it together? I know Adam Cole's, a nerd, so like, okay, maybe he did have an influence in it, but like it's Spider-Man's font, it was made from the logo. Like it's kind of hard to repurpose it for someone else, and not have that vibe.
To give them the benefit of the doubt, it was a third party that came up with the logo, and they were like, "Yeah, let's run with it," and not realizing, see, they need a full-time font nerd on staff at AEW.
Yeah, that was an interesting one. And then when I saw it the next week, I'm like, oh, okay, it's better. I like the new logo now, so 2 thumbs up for me.
Yeah, and it is interesting too. Like I never realized until a few years ago that you need a license for fonts too. Fonts aren't, fonts are art as well.
Yeah,
it's not. There's of course the open source ones, but the fancy graphic ones you get on DaFont.
Yeah,
not free for commercial use.
Yeah, you gotta read the fine print on a lot of those ones. And I always try to tell artists coming up like, hey, what font is? Like, oh, it's this name, but be sure you purchase it. There is a free version going around, but it's just for as a demo to kind of see if you like it, the way it flows. But there's subtle changes in the text that the font creator will know if you're using the demo or if you're using the actual, purchased fonts. You really have to keep an eye out for that, and I want to create the least amount of headaches for, my clients, for myself. So, make sure, all my licenses are set up. I have all the receipts, everything. So the second someone asks, oh, yep, boom, everything for you. Like I try to keep it as professional as possible.
Because, and this is no exaggeration, you can end up with a designer who is an ambulance chaser, and you will be thousands of dollars in debt because they caught you. And just through the wrangling of the legal system, just by them hiring a lawyer to file a claim against you, you have to go through the legal system. And then then instead of paying like $35, you're paying thousands of dollars just in lawyer fee. Like who knows if whatever the settlement is, you would need a lawyer to go to court and fight for you just because you didn't pay the $35.
Exactly. Especially for, the amount of shirts that go out from AEW, they're like, okay, so you sold 500 shirts with this without the license of that font. Well, we're going to charge you for each one of those shirts that were distributed with, an unofficial, font use,
plus some crazy damage fee that they come up with. Yeah,
exactly. So, I've kept myself awake with the fear of that, making sure like, okay, do I have this all set up or all my ducks in a row? Checking, triple checking, rebuying fonts sometimes if I can't immediately find my receipt, like, okay, I'm triple sure that we will be A-okay with this.
Yeah. I think this is a great tip to all budding graphic designers.
Yes.
is buy your fonts.
Yes, please buy your fonts.
Cool. Well, as we wind down, I'm curious, what are you listening to nowadays? What are some bands that are in your heavy rotation?
Right now, because of wrestling, Crazy Steve starts taking some photos of a band called Rottenness, and I've been really checking that out. A couple of, YouTubers that I watched were starting to wear shirts for there's I can't think of the band name, but I looked them up and I started kind of checking out bands in that style, and I found like bands like Zulu that I really, really enjoyed. I've been getting into ska again and just trying to find bands in that genre. I don't really know what happened, but like after my kid was born, I was just trying to find music to kind of settle her down. And for some reason, ska music was her cup of tea. Like that was the one thing that would get her to stop crying. So I'm like, okay, there's something about these trumpets in this two-step beat that she's vibing with. So let's just have it on. Let's get her mellow. And all of a sudden, I start noticing my foot tapping with it too. Like, okay, apparently I'm in my ska era. So that's where.
I mean, hey, you got to start them out somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. I can't skank because of these knees, but it's okay.
That's awesome. And if people want to see your work or reach out to you, how could they get in touch?
Oh, yeah. If you want to follow me and check out my artwork, be sure to see me on Instagram at OFTHEDEAD Designs. I'm always up to date there. If you want to see some artwork and me ramble, you can find me on Twitter or X at OFTHEDEAD209, or on Facebook. It's purely just my artwork. It's facebook.com/OFTHEDEAD Designs.
Awesome. Juan, thank you so much for taking some time to hang out with me.
No problem.
And
Thank you for
entering
having
the
me.
Squared Circle bit.
Oh,
awesome,
of course.
Man. I hope to see you at a show soon.
Yeah, of course.